Matt Mittelstadt from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University talking about AI, and now we're going to move into my purview, which is how the government gets involved in this, Matt. And George Mason, the namesake of your university, was always very concerned about it. It's why the Article 5, he insisted on getting an Article 5 in the U.S. Constitution. He was always concerned with the centralization of power. So where is the sweet spot in government regulation and artificial intelligence when it comes to what the government can use it for, also what the government can prohibit or make available so that things like my daughter is a photographer, watermarking, things like that. People say, well, AI can make it as well. How does it get watermarked? How does my image come with a watermark that makes sure that if all of a sudden I appear on, Joe Biden's body making some sort of statement, people go, oh, I can see that's it, or I could at least prove in court that it's not me. Talk about that side of it now, Matt.
Overall, so AI regulation is obviously a very bit hot topic, both in state legislatures and at the federal level. The fundamental challenge, and this is something that people are dealing with sort of in real time, is how do you actually do that? What is the right approach? A lot of people, there's one camp of people who wants to create some sort of AI agency to promote some sort of catch-all regulation and standard settings for all of these technologies in terms
Because
of the,
that always works.
because that always works. Yes, of
Yes.
course. In terms of a sweet spot, I don't necessarily think there's not a place for some forms of regulation, but those should be extremely targeted, right? We should take a specific problem in a specific industry, and if AI is relevant to that, regulate that, right?
Mhm.
Targeting works well because if you define a problem clearly, then you're not going to accidentally catch some other industry that's behaving perfectly well and benefiting people in the process. And so we shouldn't have some sort of new catch-all agency. We shouldn't have any sort of new catch-all legislation because that's how you make mistakes and that's how you really slap down innovation.
So would you agree, because I've always felt this way, that the role of government really is to establish what the penalty might be if you misuse something. So
Mhm.
I'm whether it's firearms or speech or anything, it's in the hands of the wielder. And so if AI is doing nothing wrong to anyone, it's fine. But you need to have some rule book as to what the punishments are if somebody is to misuse artificial intelligence to fake your identity or make it seem like you did something you didn't do, that kind of thing. Is that a fair thing? Maybe a level that we should be at in many things, not just AI.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I don't want to act like there's not going to be crimes committed. Actually, just this last year in 2023, $50 billion was stolen from financial institutions using synthesized voices, AI
Oh boy.
generated voices to defraud people.
Hmm.
And obviously that's bad, right? We
Hmm.
shouldn't want that, and we should act to stop those people. The thing here, though, is that whether or not you use AI, whether or not you just mimic someone's voice to try and steal money from them, uh, the crime is the same. It's
Right.
fraud, right? And we have laws on the books right now to stop fraud. And if you think about like someone strapping a gun to an autonomous drone or something, we have laws for murder, right?
Hmm.
These laws do already exist.
Well,
I'm sure there, go
is
ahead.
there a way though AI can help us find the people who do those things? I guess that's the bigger question with artificial intelligence is, okay, well, I can trace a phone call and find out, okay, Joe was the guy who tried to scam UVA Community Credit Union. Um, but I guess with AI it becomes harder to find that. So can AI also be used to Columbo it out and find the people who are perpetrating these things?
Oh, for sure. And obviously police departments, investigators are applying these technologies, facial recognition and facial
Mhm.
identification technologies. That's one example of something you can use to potentially ID a perpetrator. In terms of, say, a scam phone call or a fraud phone call, we can use AI technologies to sort of track these signals, look for digital clues, perhaps, and maybe do a slightly better job of discovering who's behind a crime than just a human ever could do. Because we can do these things, again, like I said earlier, at scale.
Mhm.
Um, you can do so much more with AI.
Well, and like you said, manpower alone, I mean, you could be going through millions of files as opposed to hundreds of files and that kind of thing.
Oh, for
I could,
sure. Yeah. Yeah, and you think about like crime scenes too, like object detection algorithms, they could be noticing small specks of blood perhaps if they're really detailed,
Mhm.
that again humans might not notice. And so there's just so much we can do with these things.
I'm going to again play great mixing bowl here. Drone technology. You mentioned crime scenes. Talk about artificial intelligence as it works in the drone space. I've one of my dear friends is the founder of Drone Responders, and it's an organization of people, first responders, who use drones to rescue people lost in the woods and things like that, or help solve crimes. Talk about the melding of these two technologies and what drones can do with the help of artificial intelligence, and what should we be watching out for?
I mean, there's obviously so much more you can do with a drone when a human doesn't necessarily need to be controlling it with a radio control remote or something like that. If
Hmm.
these things can be autonomously, say, flying through a forest fire or flying through the woods to find a missing person, um, that could again expand your ability to say discover that missing person, right? If we have
Hmm.
100 drones going through the woods, um, add in 100 people on top of that, then you have 200 actors, right, flying around trying to find these people. There doesn't need to be someone controlling this, and it just really ups your ability to save people and help people.
Well, let's go the other direction with this, and a segue into this is the government's ability to use AI, and how do we protect our liberties? Um, and it could be, and it sounds like you're of the same mind I am. We already have that rule book. It's called the Bill of Rights, but talk about the fears a lot of people have regarding the government not necessarily regulating artificial intelligence, but utilizing artificial intelligence.
Yeah, this is an area I think there is real concerns. Obviously, we do have basic rights, right? And hopefully those should generally apply. And we're going to kind of discover how those apply in real time as we move into this era. But I do think there should be certain limits, right? Like if the government is deploying an army of drones around a protest to surveil what you're doing, that could actually deter people from expressing themselves and expressing their opinion of government policy.
Mhm.
Also, if they use, say, only a facial recognition system to ID someone on a crime, well, maybe that, if they just use that piece of evidence, maybe that could get it wrong because these systems do fail. And so I think we should continue to demand a high level of evidence for crimes, continue to demand a certain limitations on what our government can do. These things are super powerful and they could really unlock a lot of surveillance and a lot of policing that maybe we don't want. And so yes, these things can help people in disaster scenarios. They can help in stop criminals, and we should figure out how to do that. But we should not undo the Bill of Rights just because we have these amazing new technologies.
If anything else, we need it more than we ever did. And one of the brilliant parts of the Bill of Rights is it didn't preclude things like artificial intelligence. That's a dangerous tightrope, though, because I've heard many people in the technology world espouse the idea that the Bill of Rights is arcane because it was written in 1789 and we didn't have telephones then, never mind artificial intelligence. But I think the brilliance in the Bill of Rights, and Virginia's Bill of Rights as well, is the ambiguity and the openness that it's left open, that it's not just pieces of paper it's protecting, it's your effects, those kind of things. Is that important to remember as we go forward into this brave new world?
Oh, for sure. And obviously, in terms of law, there's going to be some laws that do need to change, but a lot of the basics in our Constitution and with our rights, these things are general purpose. They're technology agnostic. They don't care whether or not the technology is a musket or a machine gun or written paper on using a quill or a computer or even artificial intelligence. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter. The rights are the same. These are our rights. And the technology evolving around us doesn't change that. And we should continue to respect that and figure out actively how those rights are impacted and interact with these new technologies rather than trying to undo these rights because they're supposedly old or something like that.
Right. So last a little bit here, Matt Middlestat on with us from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. A lot of people will scoff at sort of the entertainment and frivolous aspects of AI specifically, but a lot of different things. People make Dungeons and Dragons figurines with 3D printers and things like that. But a lot of times the consumer base that fun side of all these new technologies is really where a lot of the revenue is generated to help promote the serious applications of it. People shouldn't scoff at fun things that Tom Cruise might be able to do with a movie that wouldn't have been possible without AI or at least a very well paid stunt double.
Yeah, no, and there's a lot of I really do not want to dismiss the fun side of things. If you ever take Pixar, for
Hmm.
example, if you go on YouTube, look up how they make their movies, they are already using artificial intelligence to move their characters around, to model how their hair is moving across the screen. All of this is AI embedded already. And that should already show you just what we can get from the application of these technologies. We can get really well animated movies, and that's just one example, right? There's so many other applications, such as inventing your Dungeons and Dragons character, as you said, or even there's one company looking into how to 3D print AI generated facades for houses to make them look beautiful,
Right,
right?
to
Something that
upgrade. Wow.
yeah, traditionally would require a very skilled craftsman, meaning most people couldn't have a highly ornate house. That's the type of thing that we can get. And no, it's not going to save lives, but it's going to improve our lives. It's going to make us have potentially much more enjoyable
Hmm.
free time.
Well, and repairs and things like that, I think are very important. Matt, what are you working on right now before we have to go here on Freedom and Prosperity Radio?
Well, one of the big things I'm looking into is this. There's a current push to regulate the use of AI in our nation's critical infrastructure, which obviously these systems can't fail. But one thing that I'm trying to tell people, and based off my research, is critical infrastructure doesn't quite mean what you think it means. It covers over 60% of the economy as currently defined. And so,
Wow.
if we're going to regulate the use of AI in this package of industries, we need to be a bit more specific. Say what you mean, identify things like the power grid and go after that, if that's what you want to regulate. But let's not over-regulate things with this. That's how you end up slapping down these fun applications such as these facade building
Mhm.
tools that we mentioned, or Pixar, or what have you.
Joe Thomas in the morning. Thank you for joining in and being part of the program. As I said earlier, and apologies to those who like to participate via YouTube. Apparently, YouTube got hung up in the translation, but I've seen the stats. Most of you are doing this on Rumble, so you didn't know. But it wasn't YouTube. I haven't gotten strike three yet. I have received a warning and two strikes so far, so I'm in the hole, and I'm watching for the breaking ball. But it'll probably be something unforeseen, just like when I yelled ivermectin in a crowded emergency room, and I got a couple of rebukes for that. But anyway, you can get with us, leave a message at 434-882-4217, or you can email to jtinthemorningradio@gmail.com. Couple of things, reaction to our discussion on capital gains taxes. And again, if you're on YouTube and you're watching, you're like, what discussion? So the president has proposed the highest capital gains tax in over 100 years, 44%. And we talked about it being a job killer. And Mike writes into JT in the morning radio at gmail.com. He says, why does the left never get this? Well, there's a reason for it. And it'll tie into a story we're going to get into next, which is, of course, the Jews for Palestine. There was a piece, our friend John Sutz, who's one of the great advocates for America's defense of Israel, one of our few allies in the Middle East. He sent me a an opinion piece, but based on some research as well, where it goes into TikTok and how TikTok depicts Hamas, and understand the connection between TikTok. So TikTok is owned by the Chinese Communist Party. Your feeds are determined by the Chinese Communist Party and their PSYOPs directorates. And these are the same folks that said, oh, no, a bat vomited on somebody's shoes, and that's where COVID came from. So the Chinese Communist Party's PSYOPs department manages your TikTok feed. China, of course, is part of the BRIC Bank with Russia and Iran. Iran is the puppet master of Hamas. And that's not even theory. Iran has said, oh no, we run these guys. So TikTok inordinately depicts the poor, marginalized communities of the Islamist terrorists as poverty-stricken. And look at how poor, I mean, even before the bombings and the shellings began, even before October 7th, they depict how poor and destitute. What they don't say is Hamas has had the same opportunities to create the same Garden of Eden that the Israeli agriculture has, and they haven't. They were sent money to build irrigation systems, and instead they dug tunnels that helped them get into Israel without being seen. This is just facts that are left out of your TikTok feed. If you're a young person and you get your news from TikTok, this is what a lot of the divestiture is about, is insisting that the Chinese Communist Party, not only with their ability to access your personal information because you have TikTok on your phone, along with your credit cards and everything else that you have in there, tap to pay, oh, it's very convenient. So they have those accesses, but they also have the reverse, which is they get to tell you what the Chinese Communist Party wants you to see, which is America bad, China good, and any of China's allies like Iran are good and marginalized. And parasailing into a rock concert and slitting everyone's throats and raping their dead bodies is just a protest for their marginalization. And this leads to things like we're going to get into in a little bit, but it's on a grand, obscene scale, exactly what Joe Biden was doing when he went home to the 80s, Back to the Future, jumped in his political DeLorean and went back to 1984 and jumped into the campaign rhetoric of the 80s, which is we need to raise the capital gains tax on all those rich, greedy oligarchs that you work for. And then when they lay you off, which happened to apparently a massive amount of newsrooms yesterday, apparently it was a Black Wednesday in a lot of newsrooms in America. And this is even before George Soros has had a chance to coalesce his power. Notice how George hasn't been calling in as much since we went to Rumble. Maybe that would get us kicked off Rumble if we heard from George up in his dirigible. So that's why President Biden does it, is because it works. It works to say, look at how poor these people are, and I'm the only one who can do anything about it. Just like the Chi-Coms, when they say, look at how poor the Palestinian Hamas terrorist cells are, and we should be doing something about it, not punishing them for killing a bunch of Israelis.
bit cooler for the next 2 or 3 days, then a big warm-up on the way for your Thursday. Partly sunny afternoon, highs in the mid-60s. On Thursday night, mostly cloudy, 44 the overnight low. Partly sunny and 64 on Friday. Slight chance of a hit-or-miss shower Friday night, mostly cloudy and 46. Slight chance of a shower Saturday, mostly cloudy and 66. We're at 82 by Sunday and hotter after that. From BlueRidgeLife.com, I'm forecaster Tommy Stafford. Now back to Joe Thomas in the morning.
Thank you for tuning in, and I want to thank again Bill the Grill Guy, who's a longtime caller, first-time listener. No, have that other backwards. Longtime listener and called in frequently to the old radio show, and pointed out to me yesterday that if you have Bluetooth in your car, Rumble's app, it's just like having me back inside your car radio. So I appreciate that, Bill. You can call in with your comments on any of the stuff we have, 434-882-4217. I apologize. We got a new cell phone yesterday, and one of the things it won't let me do, and tell me this hasn't happened to you. So I want to set up the voicemail to say, hi, this is Joe. We can't take your comments live. Please leave your message at the beep. And it says, well, enter your PIN number. But I've never set up a PIN number. I have to spend some time with T-Mobile later today. And I'm sure it'll be something where they'll just look at me like some addled 60-year-old and go, oh, sir, you just have to. So it'll be, but if you get to the voicemail and you don't hear my dulcet tones, don't freak out. 434-882-4217. We can still play your comments later on in the show, I believe. Also, you can send them by email to jtinthemorningradio@gmail.com. 7th District GOP race heating up as voting begins on May the 3rd. And early voting, 45 days, got to represent, right? So 45 days from the June 18th primary culmination day, and I'm going to be moderating a forum amongst the GOP hopefuls for that. We'll dive into that race a little bit. The president has announced a capital gains tax rate that's higher than it's been in over 100 years. And the 80s called him and said they wanted their campaign platform back, but he's doubling down on there are rich oligarchs out there that he's going to go get their money from them there. Jason Miyares and Abigail Spanberger are two candidates for governor in 2025 of the Commonwealth. Yes, they both currently have jobs right now. So Republican Attorney General Jason Miyares came to the University of Virginia to woo the Center for Politics, while Abigail Spanberger came with bags of other people's money to give to schools/law enforcement to be seen as further to the right. And we'll get into how that went in a little bit as well. But I was talking about this amazing construct of Jews for Palestine. And this is Chuck Schumer yesterday on the Senate floor, again talking about the aid to Israel that also included $9 billion for Palestine.
Nobody expects Prime Minister Netanyahu to do the things that must be done to break the cycle of violence, to preserve Israel's credibility on the world stage, and to work towards a two-state solution. At this critical juncture, I believe a new election is the only way to allow for a healthy and open decision-making process about the future of Israel.
So that was Chuck Schumer yesterday, and he was again doubling down on his statements that he thinks there ought to be a parliamentary. Now, what do you think we would say if, say, the Republican candidate for president, we went through the 270 to win. Right now, polls indicate that Donald J. Trump will receive about 293 electoral votes if the polling bears out. Now, again, people got to get out and vote, especially in our 45-day craziness here in Virginia. But so Donald Trump gets elected. What happens when the British Prime Minister goes onto the floor of the House of Commons and demands another election in America? We need another election in America. Or the national popular vote people start protesting, saying, it's the voice of the people, and we want New York and LA and Chicago to pick all the presidents from here on out because it's good to be the king. Just like we were talking about on yesterday's program. Don't go watch it now if you missed yesterday's program. Mark Maybach from Save Our States was on detailing the craziness of that and the unconstitutionality of it, which will, again, of course, have to be litigated there as well. But so Chuck Schumer is facing rebuke from Jews in his district. The Jewish community is apparently all in for Palestine. 100 pro-Palestinian Jewish protesters were arrested blocking traffic near the Brooklyn home of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. He was, of course, not there, but this is, again, another one of these protests designed to bother everyone else. They've done it on I-95 just north of Richmond. They did it on the Golden Gate Bridge. This is inconvenience others so that they will come to your side somehow. We haven't gone full on terrorist yet. We're just going to be inconvenient for right now. But the threat is implicit. So the protests, again, you sit there and you say, my gosh, is this really a group? Is this not some arc in a Mel Brooks movie? Jews for Palestine? Next thing you know, the Jewish community was really in favor of Adolf Hitler too, especially the Hollywood elites, because they were the poor, marginalized Germans punished by the Treaty of Versailles and those British and French. Why? They just deserve it because the Germans were a marginalized community back in the 30s and they were just trying to get themselves out from under the jackboots of those Wilsonian democracies like Britain and France, the United States. They just needed elbow room. They needed a port. And besides, the Poles were terrorizing them anyway. Of course, we come to find out later that it was the Germans who were blowing up their own munition dumps and then blaming it on the Polish. But they were marginalized. It's okay. And I bring this up not to say that Hamas is the Nazis, although there are historical connections where the Nazis went down into the Middle East and started to work with the Islamist groups. Because on October 8th, 2023, I told you that this is a battle between East versus West. This isn't, as much as you would like to think that it is religious, it is hiding under religiosity. The terrorists, the murderers are wearing cover. They're wrapping themselves in the burqas of religiosity when really they're nothing more than authoritarian fascists. See how they govern, with apologies to the other Lenin, John and Paul. See how they govern. Look at the states that they take over. Look at what happened after the Arab Spring. Barack Obama, President of the United States, said, well, President Mubarak shut Twitter down. That's a pretty cool thing. Can we do that? I remember that viscerally. I'm like, oh my God. And of course now we see again where the president wants to shut down social media platforms where people might have a conversation about these kind of things and say, have you really played this through? So you say, Joe, why? Why in the name of Moses himself are these? Well, understand that as Moses was up at the top of the mountain getting the 10 Commandments, there were Israelites in his group, and it continued to grow, that started to say, those Egyptians weren't really all that bad to us. Can we go back and maybe they'll be nicer to us now that we've protested? We went on strike for a little while and wandered here in the desert for a little while because we're kind of hungry. And even when God provided manna from heaven, they said, yeah, but the food was still better when we were slaves. The point of the story, whether it's historical or not, is that this is hardwired into you and me. It's hardwired into us to say, freedom, I might be hungry. I might have to worry about how I pay my bills or where I can take my wife for her birthday. And it's that seed that grows into things like President Biden's call for the biggest capital gains tax rate in over 100 years. 44, is it 44.1? It's 44 point something. At that point, I mean, we're slicing the bologna pretty thin. Once you get a 44%, job killing, business closing. And of course, it'll be supported by members of the media that are owned by George Soros. And we get back to a seminal interview. I would play my interview with Bill O'Reilly because we talked about the same stuff, but apparently I'm not allowed to. But Bill O'Reilly, prior to that, talked to another fellow who does what we do now on the interwebs, Tucker Carlson, about losing his job and that fear of freedom, and what do you do when you finally get that freedom? And I still say this is one of the most seminal discussions I've heard, and you can infer whatever importance you will to it. But this is Bill O'Reilly in that famous debate night interview with Tucker Carlson.
It wasn't like thunderbolt like you out of the blue. What the deuce is this? Okay. And so what I did was basically accept it right away, like I would accept a car accident or something like that.
Yeah.
There's nothing I can do about it. There's absolutely nothing I can do about it. We got my people, my lawyers, managers. We had a nice conversation with News Corp. They fulfill their contractual obligations to me, every bit of it. And we said, see you later. That's what happened.
So, but you said the predicate to all of this happening was Roger Ailes leaving.
Right.
What was that exactly?
I don't know. I made it my business to stay out of the corporate politics at Fox.
Yeah.
So in 20 years plus that I was working there, I saw Rupert Murdoch 7 times.
Yeah.
In 20 years. That's it. I didn't have anything to do with that side of the business. Now, Ailes would call and yell at me from time to time that I said something stupid. And I would say to him, if you're going to call and yell at me when I say something stupid, that's going to take up most of your day, every day. All right, so why don't you just pick your spots here, you know? I didn't have any kind of corporate relationship, so I didn't know.
Even with Ailes?
Oh, the Ailes was news analysis relationship.
Yeah.
And news gathering.
Did you respect him?
The guy was a giant.
Yeah.
Oh, he knew what was going on. He was a great talent evaluator.
Yes.
He knew who was good on TV and who wasn't. Okay? He's a no BS guy. I asked him a question, I got an answer. Do you know how rare that is in the media? To ask somebody a question, get an honest answer?
Never happens.
It happened twice to me. Peter Jennings and Roger Ailes. Those were the guys. I ask them a question, I get an honest answer.
Both self-made guys.
Whatever it was. But here's what people don't understand about television news. It's like professional football, the NFL. If you are a talent, both Carlson and I are talent. That's what they call us, because we're on television. You have to beat the shows that are up against you. Right? So when I was at Inside Edition, I had to beat Wheel of Fortune or whoever I was competing against,
right?
Okay? Or at least come close. You have to beat the other team. And if you do beat them, like you did and I did, then you're rewarded with money. Not love, not loyalty, money. It's a pure play. So when personnel changes, then it's all thrown into chaos. So Tom Brady leaves the New England Patriots, right?
Yeah.
The entire dynamic of the organization changes. Now, some might say for the better, some might say for the worse, but it's totally different without Tom Brady.
But here's where the analogy breaks down. The Patriots didn't fire Tom Brady the minute he won the Super Bowl and then denounce him as a sex criminal or a racist. So
Well-
why would you fire the guy, in your case, for example, who had dominated the space, was continuing, still number one?
And we'll
That
get back
just
to
seems
this in
acting
just
against interest.
a moment, because that question is the key point to this. But we got to get to a break here. We'll get Mac in here, and then we'll follow up on this. You, me, and the 7th District debate coming up.
A bit cooler for the next 2 or 3 days, then a big warm-up on the way for your Thursday partly sunny afternoon, highs in the mid-60s. On Thursday night, mostly cloudy, 44 the overnight low, partly sunny and 64 on Friday. Slight chance of a hit-or-miss shower Friday night, mostly cloudy and 46. Slight chance of a shower Saturday, mostly cloudy and 66. We're at 82 by Sunday and hotter after that. From BlueRidgeLife.com, I'm forecaster Tommy Stafford. Now back to Joe Thomas in the morning.
Joe Thomas in the morning. Thank you for letting us do the voodoo that we do so well. Of course, the portion of our program where Mac McDonald opens his notebook for us. He said something, I right as we were coming on the air, he said Iran or Iran.
A rant.
Oh, a rant. Okay, well, that was
A rant. I'll give you some headlines first, and then I just saw something this morning. You know, a story that I just shake my head. You know, it's like. Anyway, I'll get to it in a second. You might even be able to guess what it is. All right, draft night. I do not get caught up in the draft. All that to me, it's like recruiting, because there's so many busts and who goes where. But anyway, 4 quarterbacks could go in the top 10, 3 in the first 3, and if the Bears take Caleb Williams, which they're supposed to, LSU's Jaden Daniels could go to the Commanders with the 2nd pick, and that means Drake May, number 3, could be a Patriot after tonight, too. So with the 5th pick and a trade with the Chargers, J.J. McCarthy could become a Viking. So it could be 4 in the top 5 of the quarterbacks. So anyway, have fun.
What
Watch
was
it
that?
tonight.
What was that one that was like Dan Marino and all these guys? When was that 83 or 84?
Yeah.
It was just
The greatest, they called the greatest quarterback draft of all times. Yeah, no, you're so right. All right, in Charlotte, Virginia's number 6 women's lacrosse team outlasted number 14 UNC in the ACC quarters, winning 13-12. 3 Cavaliers notched hat tricks. Now in the cage,
Wow.
goalie Mel Josephson had 11 saves. I don't know if it was her play or she does this sock combination, 2 different socks. What was it? The guy who said, "Yeah, I got the same pair back home." Josephson is 2nd in the league in save percentage. She had 11 saves Wednesday, and she said it's a new era with their new head coach, and the socks will stay as part of the ritual.
Oh, it's actually phenomenal. I think it really marks the fact that this is a new era of Virginia lacrosse. We're gritty and we're here to compete, and we're not going to back down to anybody, no matter who they are. Well, these are the first time I've ever worn these socks, but every day, practice, games, no matter what, I'm wearing a different kind of colorful sock. You know, I like to say it's because I'm quirky like my socks, but also like really, shin guards are kind of embarrassing to wear in college, but I need them.
They were excited. I mean, come on. It's Virginia's first win over the Heels in 10 years.
Oh, my God.
And it snapped a 14-game losing streak. Syracuse is next Friday at 5. UVA was in the semifinals just a couple of years ago. The last appearance in the finals, in case you're keeping score, 07. And the Virginia baseball team will play in Fenway tonight, which will be worth a look. Hope
Is that going to be on, like, television?
Yeah, somebody's got it. Yeah, absolutely. I could probably look it up here real quick. The Miami Heat tied the first-round series with the Celtics last night, 111-101. Do you realize Boston is just 13-14 at home in postseason?
What?
Since in the last 3 years? Yeah. The Heat dropped 23 threes. Head coach Eric Spoelstra told his team it's all about the math. Miami put up 43 trays after Spoelstra told the media after they were, they were down 34 in game one.
Oh my God.
And Spoelstra told the media, he goes, no, 53s is not realistic, but 43 is. So anyway, the performance in Boston came from a team that they're awful in game one. And anyway, in case you want to know, the Heat became the first playoff team in the past 30 years to win by double digits, despite being an underdog of 14 points or more while eating snow cones in the OKC won by 32, 124-92. The Thunder have a 2-0 lead over the Pelicans. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander posted 33. O's win over the Angels. Nats lose to the Dodgers. Yankees beat the A's. Okay, now, since we're transitioning into baseball and because this goes hand in hand with the story I read today. All right, you ready for this? The Heisman Trust or whatever, the Heisman Trust announced yesterday they're going to give the Heisman back to Reggie Bush.
Really? Because they heard me say what's up with that.
Yeah, because of NIL. Oh, forget that his family, at that time it was ridiculous what Bush and his family were receiving improper benefits from as my mom used to say, who laid the chunk? But I mean but they're going to give it back to Reggie and say because of nil. Right. Because we're in nil now, let's give the Heisman Trophy back. Wait a minute. Okay. So is it time now to get Shoeless Joe Jackson and Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame?
I think yes. I personally would say yes.
If that's the case, George Landis, the commissioner at the time, who is now in the Hall, 80 years after he died or whatever it was. And so now Shoeless Joe, and we're talking about, we just this week talked about 8 Men Out, one of the great baseball movies, one of my top 5 baseball movies of all time, and the Black Sox scandal. And if you have kids and you haven't shown this movie or haven't seen the movie with your kids, you need to see it, watch it, and explain it, what happened in 1919. It's a wonderful piece of history. Well, is Shoeless Joe now going to get in?
Well, and I mean, we talked about this. See, if you're going to say, you and I have been doing this for a few months, right, Mac?
Right.
This is not our first rodeo. I pointed out that you've got guys now in the league with fantasy baseball teams, and pick Juan Soto. Juan Soto might have Clayton Kershaw on his fantasy baseball team. And he's facing Clayton Kershaw in the 9th inning, but he knows if Clayton Kershaw strikes him out, he banks money. So, what's the decision here? Remember, Pete Rose was in trouble, if I'm not mistaken, and his defense was, I was only betting on the Expos, which, of course, was probably half of his problem. If you remember,
and horses.
Yeah. But so he was betting on his own team. The Expos kids, if you Google them, they're now known as the Washington Nationals. But Pete Rose was the manager of the Expos. This is when it all began, was he was betting on the Expos to win. And and his defense was, but I was betting on myself. And I guess the argument was, yeah, but then you make decisions that impact other games. You might
Right.
leave a pitcher in or bring a pitcher in that you wouldn't do otherwise just to win the money on that game or not. But how is fantasy baseball with these teams making people money any different than actually betting on the real baseball
Joe,
team?
don't ask me to try to explain any of this because I can't. It doesn't, it never has. It just does not make sense.
Yeah,
So,
I guess
you know,
not.
because see, the vacated when I think it was 2010, right? When Bush had the Heisman vacated.
Right.
Lengthy investigation into the improper benefits that he received. House,
Which are all now perfectly legal under NIL, correct?
yeah. So the story read, with student athletes now able to profit off their name, image, and likeness, the Heisman Trust felt it was appropriate to give Bush his trophy back. Oh, yeah, just because the kids now, that makes sense to me.
Well,
I
so-
swear.
and I understand the logic of saying, well, if something was considered assault 10 years ago and somebody was arrested and put in jail for it, and we've changed the meaning of assault, does that retroactively go back? And I understand all that. I think some of these rules may have been silly at the time, or if they're silly now, why weren't they silly at the time? I'm
Yeah, well,
fine.
so exactly. Well, because of the transition of trying to do this, and so many of the the old guard in college athletics was trying to keep things pure. Yeah, right.
And I think, moreover, though, this points to how silly the world of name, image, likeness actually is now, doesn't it?
Look, so this is a domino effect, right? USC won the national title in 2004, and they had 14 wins that year. So what do they get the victories back, or with games that Bush played in? So does that mean they get their national title back? That means they get their national trophy back, because now, because all right, Bush has been considered one of the great running backs of all time in college. But he filed a defamation lawsuit against the NCAA. When was it? That was in 2021, right? Over a statement made. So now with NIL being a part of, what? I give up.
Again,
I'm
people-
telling you, I give up.
But people will misunderstand my point. My point is name, image, likeness is silly right now, because there are also rules about and I love people who bring up, well, a biotech major that's a grad assistant at the University of Virginia. There are rules regarding your scholarships, regardless of what you do at the university level, and I think this is part and parcel of the debasement of the value of a college degree anyway, because we're just saying you're just an intern in some sort of industry, and this is just an unpaid internship, and the college degree you're getting is worthless anyway. The president's going to pay them all back anyway at some point. I mean, at some point, when do the colleges sit up and say, hey, hang on a second here? Getting a degree might actually still have some value, because it's certainly in all of these stories, as I string them together in my head in this strange little bulletin board that I'm running strings across, it seems like the narrative is the college degree is worthless, and you're just here playing football, or you're just here, working in some lab for some big pharma company, and we're just not paying you for it. And I think that has to be fixed.
I don't know if you remember, Joe, if you were in town, or even remember the history of the late 80s when Virginia got slapped because of a Virginia Student Aid Foundation and a guy named Ted Davenport, who decided it was a pay window where people could walk in and get loans. They could get loans, and there was an NCAA stipend thing at that time, but the way that the loans were being distributed was found. And a lot of people, Joe Mark, rest in peace, one of my good friends in the 80s, who directed me early on with the likes of Todd Turner, and Joe Mark got fired over it because he followed up what Ted Davenport was doing. I mean, really, I could go on. In fact, I'm probably, when I really sit down and say, okay, I'm going to do this book, I'm going to dive into all the stuff that happened in the 80s that a lot of people, don't remember. So what are we going to do now? We're going to take that away from Virginia. Oh, what's NIL now? Well, we've got our new Sabre Society. So because NIL is as active now, let's go back and rescind and take away the penalties that Virginia suffered in the 80s. We're just going to mark it off they didn't lose any games or anything because of it. It's not like they had, just they got a little slap on the wrist. And let's look at Carolina once again too, because of let's look at Carolina because of the history class. Yeah. So academics weren't important either. So we're going to go ahead.
So, and at some point or another, the debate over prostitution being legal, Rick Pitino can get a lot of wins put back in there. I mean, allegedly. But,
okay, but all right. But Joe, what would be the hook in that story? Okay.
All right. Yeah, don't get your panties in an uproar, Mac. All right, enough of this. You go get some sports journalists taught up there.
Yeah.
We'll talk to you in the morning.
All right. I'll see you first thing in the morning.
A bit cooler for the next 2 or 3 days, then a big warm-up on the way for your Thursday, partly sunny afternoon highs in the mid-60s. On Thursday night, mostly cloudy, 44 the overnight low, partly sunny and 64 on Friday. Slight chance of a hit-or-miss shower Friday night, mostly cloudy and 46. Slight chance of a shower Saturday, mostly cloudy and 66. We're at 82 by Sunday and hotter after that. From BlueRidgeLife.com, I'm forecaster Tommy Stafford. Now back to Joe Thomas in the morning.
Joe Thomas in the morning. Thank you for letting us do this for you on Rumble and YouTube until we get our broadcast facilities back. I'll need friends in Washington, which means we're going to cover all these congressional races. Well, I guess the FCC will determine whether or not we get the radio station or not long before we finish voting on June 18th in these primaries. And joining us from the campaign trail, I'm going to be in the 7th Congressional District tonight, moderating a forum amongst candidates for the Virginia Republican nomination. And again, May 3rd, the voting begins, culminates June 18th. Cameron Hamilton is on with us. Cameron, good to see you again. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Good to see you.
So this race is still full of people. There's a big crowd of folks trying to get the GOP nomination. Is that, I mean, I don't want to say problematic, but is it tough to get a message out with so many people trying to get the votes of the 7th District GOP?
It certainly does add challenges. There's no denying that. I think ultimately, this race is going to come down to a couple of key things, but it does make it more complicated, more nuanced. We have a lot of really great individuals that have decided to run for office. And so having said that, it's about building partnerships, making sure that you can fundraise properly and that you can advertise properly and you can have a sustaining campaign with support and build out that infrastructure for grassroots, and all those things culminating together are never easy. And so it does make it a bit nuanced, but nonetheless, I think we've made some really great strides.
The Republicans in the 7th District, ever since the glory days of Dave Bratt versus Eric Cantor, have been very much tuned into matchups make fights. They're very tuned into looking at all you guys and gals in the race. I meant that in the pejorative. Didn't want to, gender shame or anything like that. But they're looking at it saying, well, who are you going to face? There are, I think, more people actually running for the Democratic Party nomination. Of course, the whistleblower brothers of the Vindman family being the most notable name. But is it tough to say who we're running against, or is it pretty straightforward that these are people who are going to govern or represent the 7th District pretty much the same way Congresswoman Spanberger has?
Well, I don't know if there's very many on the Democratic side that actually would, govern as Spanberger did. She ran on the party platform of 2018. She was very tactful, very smart about how she engaged in her rhetoric and her policy decisions. So she's a difficult incumbent to unseat. She's running for governor now, so therefore that provides us an opportunity. Most of the Democratic candidates, if not all of them, have actually moved pretty far to the left of her. So having said that, I do think it presents a real opportunity for a conservative to come back and win this seat, especially a common sense conservative. I had an honor of going to the NAACP candidate forum in Stafford, again, myself and 2 other Republicans on stage with all the Democrats. To be honest, we all held our own. I actually sat next to Mr. Vindman, and I think when it comes to the Democratic platform, I'm actually extremely confident no matter who they put up there as their nominee. Most likely it will be Mr. Vindman because I think he's raised millions of dollars. I think right now some estimates are $3 million is what he's raised so far just for the primary alone.
Wow.
I think the Democratic Party is going to protect that investment, their financial infrastructure. I will tell you very clearly, he is not their best candidate. If they actually wanted to have a chance to win, they would not prop him up. Instead, they would use some of the sentiments or the opinions of a few of the other candidates who might not be as well known, but would be very, very viable in a general election, very competitive to disrupt and beat. So I think if Vindman is the Democratic nominee, and Lord willing, I believe that I can win this primary here for the Republican Party. I think it'll be a slam dunk victory for Republicans.
Well, talk a little bit about you sound very analytical. I mean, that's, rarity. You hear people, actually saying, well, this Democrat or that Democrat. I mean, obviously knowing who your opponent is important in any affair. And when a competition is coming up. So talk about your background and what you bring to the office, because I think that also translates, if you are the congressperson from the 7th District, walking into a battle for who's the speaker, or even beyond that, trying to get legislation passed in what may still be a pretty closely divided House.
Yeah, that's a really great topic. So I spent 10 years as a Navy SEAL. I also worked at the State Department within the Directorate of Operational Medicine under a program called Project Guardian, protecting dignitaries and VIPs overseas, also dealing with crisis response and contingency planning for Americans overseas at different embassies and locations. After my time there, I worked at the Department of Homeland Security, As the division director for emergency medical services, I maintained oversight of roughly 4,000 EMTs in DHS, working principally along the southern border.
Wow.
So I've worked for 3 different federal agencies under 4 different administrations for most of my professional career. I'm a civil servant at heart, and my experience and expertise has been in the federal workspace. I've helped assist with legislative matters, with appropriation matters, with briefing members of Congress, with national security implications, foreign affairs, you name it, military affairs. My experience is very broad. And I think I know what the bureaucratic sickness is that plagues our government. I'm running as a strong conservative. I've been endorsed by members of the Freedom Caucus, but I'm also running as a common sense conservative with some very libertarian leanings when it comes to economics and when it comes to the defense of civil liberties. And I will tell you, the conservative movement has a real messaging problem when it comes to the middle of America. They see us as warmongers, or they see us many times as just sort of this party that represents the military establishment. I bring a lot more depth. And yes, I've served honorably in 2 combat tours, but I also bring some very, very philosophical approaches when it comes to what form of government would we actually want to enact? What would the founders have wanted for us today? I believe in setting barriers and restraint to federal government intrusion, which is frankly not a message that you hear coming out of the Republican Party.
We've talked about this in years past, where there seems to be 2 military services. There's the bureaucratic military service, the Pentagon,
Right.
and aside from its role, not really distinguishable from a lot of the other DC bureaucracies of EPA or Department of Education, and the battlefield military. And you've served both. So talk about what the men and women who voluntarily go into combat and may have to do it again as this heats up in between Israel and Hamas, and we listen to more and more people protesting about what's going to happen next. Talk about what those men and women who voluntarily go into the field need from the bureaucratic side of the military.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think ultimately what they need is stronger leadership. We have a crisis of leadership right now. We don't have true servant leaders. We have political agendas that have inculcated so much of our military that have really just expanded into areas it was never intended to be. We have probably the worst morale that we've ever had in the armed forces. Not only that, but we have actual moral injury going on within many service members and within many veteran families. I know actively of veteran families that are actually encouraging their children who are wanting to be like dad, wanting to be like mom, join the armed forces, do something for this country, and they're being advised by family members who have served previously, don't do it. This is not the right time. This is not the right leadership. This is not the right government. That has huge implications. So I think, number one, we need strong and principled leadership to know that we're here to focus on combat lethality, not woke political agendas, or not the inference or insertion of fringe elements that don't improve combat lethality. We need to bring our armed forces back into believing it's an entity that's elite, where standards are held very high. We need to also ensure that they have the proper resources and support needed. During the COVID lockdowns, for example, we kicked out 8,500 service members who didn't adhere to the vaccine mandates. Secretary of Defense defiantly said on the House floor of Representatives, when asked by Matt Gaetz, a gentleman who's endorsed me, would you allow individuals who were kicked out to rejoin? He said no. So to be honest, one of the things we need in the military right now is, if I were elected, Lord willing, I would probably seek to fire almost every general officer we have in the United States military and clean up the ranks, promote from within, create an aggressive and competitive mindset in our service members, actively recruit individuals who are patriotic, who believe in serving this country honorably, remove politics from our armed forces. And I think if we had strong leadership and you appointed a true General Patton or someone like that, or General MacArthur to come back and take over the Department of Defense, I think we could reverse course pretty quickly. It would take, though, probably about 4 years.
President Biden yesterday, while reading his stage directions from his teleprompter, was also announcing the highest capital gains tax in over 100 years. Talk about, what your view, you talked about your libertarian bent. I mean, I'm sitting here just about to start a small business, and I have a dear friend who's helping financially with that. But you start attacking people because they've been successful, they're going to stop investing in small businesses with people who have a good idea and maybe want to change a marketplace, be an agent of that kind of economic challenge that has made America great over the years past. Talk about what Congressman Cameron Hamilton would do in the face of President Biden proposing such a massive capital gains increase, and along with other tax increases.
Yeah, so actually, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because the Ways and Means Committee, I've met with Congressman Stubbe and many others. That is a committee that I would seek to be on. It's not a very well-known committee for its influence, but oh my goodness, it has an incredible amount of impact on the average American in their taxes. So I'm an aggressive deregulator. I'm at heart. So one of the things that I would seek to institute is policy that actually ensures individuals can retain their private capital, because there are so many downstream effects that are positive for our government, our economy, you name it. A circular economy, in theory, is a wonderful idea, and it does exist, but it exists on the free market. It doesn't exist through intrusion or in federal regulation. What we have now is cronyism on so many different levels, and it's awful. I think the modern monetary theory is one of the most destructive theories that we've seen in national governance. We print money, we provide available securities, we borrow against that, we're paying the interest on borrowed money, sending it overseas. Again, this is what bad faith actors have. So one of the strongest things I would advocate for is a balanced budget. If Congress can't balance its budget, Congress doesn't get paid. It's that simple. And then I also think that we really need to look at aggressively cutting down regulation, extending the Tax Cut and Job Act, the TCJA, as well as other acts that would really provide a lot of leverage and resources back to the hands of we the people. At the end of the day, what Americans seem to fail to understand, and this is a problem we have with messaging, your tax dollars are your capital, your wealth. And it becomes a value structure and a value argument over, do you want to be the agent to ensure your wealth is distributed where you choose properly? Or would you rather 435 bureaucrats in DC decide that for you? I favor the former, not the latter. And so those are the kind of efforts that I would want to bring about very aggressively.
Cameron Hamilton is on with us. He's one of the candidates that I'll be moderating, I guess is the word tonight, in a forum in the 7th District out near Fred Vegas. So I hope you can join us for that. We'll have some highlights for you tomorrow morning here in this space as well. You mentioned working on the border, Department of Homeland Security down there. The most recent abomination in Washington is this continued zeal to throw money and hundreds of millions of dollars to the Ukrainian government for their border security and UNGATS for ours. Talk about what Congressman Hamilton would do regarding that kind of, just to me anyway, malfeasance.
Yeah, it's hard to look at what we've seen with this recent bill that passed and not think that it's malfeasance on part of both Republicans and Democrats working together to essentially rob the American people of their wealth and send it overseas. It's really quite awful. I wish I could describe it differently than that, but I can't, unfortunately. I also think that right now, Kat Cammack, actually, I give her a lot of credit. She wanted to institute an amendment that would strip roughly $10 billion of the $60 billion that were not for military services. We're paying $10 billion of that bill is going for municipal services for the government of Ukraine. Again, what does that mean? Americans are paying for the government of Ukraine to man their office buildings, for their secretaries, for their civic services. Why are we doing this when we have people in Flint, Michigan that still don't have clean water? I just find these different conclusions preposterous, and it's almost like we're living in the land of the emperor has no clothes. We all know it's wrong. We all know it doesn't make sense, and yet we keep doing this, and we keep being told this is a conservative bastion of the future. So I think we need to radically cut spending. I think we need to focus back on the basics. Let's balance our budget. Let's do right by the American taxpayer. And then if we have an excess, we can consider sending more overseas to help our allies.
Well, let me ask you this last one for you, Cameron, and we'll see you tonight for the forum and the Tea Party that it's been very gracious to, even after I lost my radio show, to still have me moderate this forum amongst you GOP hopefuls for the House. And again, voting begins on May 3rd. May 3rd till June 18th, 45 days. So please volunteer to help watch the polls and everything else there with that. Last one on that subject, though, you brought up the spending and what's happening. I've heard the phrase "the firm." Senator Mike Lee brought this up. He says it's the firm of Jeffries, Johnson, Schumer, and McConnell. People like me who say, can we just have some oversight over this money, which I view as almost money laundering. We send the money over there in these packages, and then it gets spent back here in our military industrial complex in monies that we can't follow up on. So we can't even FOIA who's spending what on what. Talk about this firm, these four people who seem to be dictating all the government that happens in the United States.
My biggest concern with the Republican Party right now is we're not offering a substantive alternative to what's going on. We've seen neoconservatism partner with progressives and Democrats in a way that's very unique and doesn't frankly make any sense. Right now, Senator Mike Lee, he talks about the firm as the argument of a sort of a uniparty structure where it's not really a true uniparty, but it's a coalition and alliance made for convenience because of financial inference and because of the implications of governing, and passing bills. Congress has the wrong agenda and initiatives. They believe, what does governing look like? Well, passing more bills, except if they're bad bills. That's the problem. And we don't seem to have many legislators that are willing to look at the role of the legislature is to set boundaries on federal government intrusion and ensure that we're being responsible with the resources entrusted to us by the American people. And that seems to be thrown completely out the window. I would call it a firm. I wish I could describe it something differently. And Mike is very satirical, but I think he is also very correct. We have strange bedfellows right now where big government conservatives are partnering with big government Democrats for the perpetuation of passing bills. And again, the very fact that we always waive every year the House rules that requires germaneness in these bills and legislative actions. Why? Well, because we have to make deals, because we have to add pork. We have to remind ourselves some of these larger groups that are lobbying the speaker or the minority leader or others, they have expectations of a return on investment. They spend millions and millions of dollars. They help fundraise these campaigns. And when it comes time, we shouldn't be surprised when we see massive omnibus bills coming back, because now it's our chance to make sure that the investors that gave us money for our campaigns have a return. And that's what we see so much in politics. And so that's what Mike Lee talks about quite a bit, and I've had lobbyists tell me, oh, you want to work on this committee? There's no money in that. Well, that's why I want to work there. I don't want to be owned by a corporation or by a political interest.
Well, we look forward to seeing you tonight, Cameron, along with other participants in this, because this is going to be a big 45-day battle for this nomination, and I think it's going to get rancorous. You certainly strike me as somebody who's not the bombast that you expect. Where's the lectern pounding and all of that? But I think Virginians like a thoughtful, almost bordering on nerdy representative. So good luck. Look forward to seeing you in person tonight, along with all the other participants. And thank you for joining us this morning.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
And we'll be right back on Joe Thomas in the Morning.
A bit cooler for the next 2 or 3 days, then a big warm-up on the way for your Thursday, partly sunny afternoon, highs in the mid-60s. On Thursday night, mostly cloudy, 44 the overnight low, partly sunny and 64 on Friday. Slight chance of a hit-or-miss shower Friday night, mostly cloudy and 46. Slight chance of a shower Saturday, mostly cloudy and 66. We're at 82 by Sunday and hotter after that. From BlueRidgeLife.com, I'm forecaster Tommy Stafford. Now back to Joe Thomas in the Morning.
morning. Thank you for joining in and being part of the proceedings here, and at 434-882-4217. Also, those who tune in via someplace where email is the best way to get to us. Is jtinthemorningradio@gmail.com. And I want to finish up. We had promised to get into the meat and potatoes of the Bill O'Reilly piece. I think that's seminal regarding why the capital gains tax hike is so bad. But I wanted to get into this a little bit. Two gubernatorial candidates for 2025 were in Central Virginia, pitching to radically different crowds. First, Jason Miyares was at the UVA Center for Politics, trying to woo them over to his candidacy for the GOP nomination.
Miyares shared his experience of working with people who he hasn't always seen eye to eye with. He shares his bipartisan initiative, Returning Citizens Job Fair, where people who were once incarcerated are able to get back into the workforce.
What I heard over and over again was they were really worried about not being able to find work. But then I would also meet with employers and said, we can't find employees. So we just did one last weekend in Norfolk. We've done one in Richmond and Petersburg, our Returning Citizens Job Fair, right? Our goal should be, you pay your debts to society, we want you to be a productive member.
Other topics that he discussed.
The idea of recidivism has been a big topic, and there's an organization in Central Virginia that works very hard in that space. It's called the Network to Work program. They're very active in fighting recidivism, where they actually have a board member specifically there to deal with it. And then on the other side, here comes Congresswoman Spanberger into the district saying, look at me, I'm tough on crime and I'm giving money to law enforcement.